Is the Unnamed Tavern named Unnamed Tavern? Is Unnamed Tavern named Unnamed Tavern, or is it a tavern that's not been named?
I love these transitions.
RoboDebt.
These transitions. Oh, here we go.
Landon, take it away.
Mate. Australia, mate. Our neighbors.
So RoboDebt, right? Here, for those that understand the situation. If you're not Australian, you probably don't know what RoboDebt is. It is not the apocalypse that Elon Musk is putting in his stuff. It is actually a fairly serious scheme that the previous coalition foisted on Australians and
oh boy,
impacted some of the most vulnerable Australians to the point where there's been a number of suicides. It is estimated. So what is RoboDebt? Well, let's assume that you lose your job and you go to try to collect assistance, right? The Australian terms for this stuff are they. But imagine whatever your country has, you have some assistance because you're not employed, and so you're looking for work while you're collecting essentially government assistance to survive. And then all of a sudden you start to get some part-time jobs that kind of gigs here and there to try to fill in the gaps. And eventually, let's say you find you get a job and you start working and you have a new salary again. What the RoboDebt scheme would say, we see the income coming in, we sum up, we see how much money you reported for taxes or reported on you for taxes that year. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that money that you collected that year. So let's say, 7, 8 months you were unemployed, had some part-time work, and then the last 3 months you got employed. It was a reasonable salary. Well, what they did is they said, okay, let's take the total amount of money you had that year, divide it by 12, and assume each month you earn that much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's say, well, the problem is, divided by 12, your monthly average is too much to require to qualify for assistance, right? When you're unemployed, you had no income, and so you qualified. But they say the total amount you had for that year, as reported to the tax office, is
who
this
the
much.
fuck came up with this? Who the fuck came up with this calculation?
Apparently,
so,
awesome.
yes. So
not an accountant. Again, I'm quite sure.
So let's say, for example, you earn $12,000 that year, and so they say, well, $1,000 a month would not qualify, would be too much income to qualify for the assistance. So please give it back, right? So the RoboDebt scheme.
Real quick, I just want to say thank you to whomever anonymously just donated $250 to Ben's fundraiser. That brought us over the halfway point. That is also the largest donation we've had. I really appreciate that. I'm sure Ben does too, although he's not currently monitoring that. I think he's currently taking this with. So
for him.
It is much appreciated to whomever you are.
By the way, there's also a couple of small donations that came just as a result, just recently as well.
Yes.
From this, I presume, from this thing. So those that contributed, whether $5, whatever it is, that helps as well, because every bit counts. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we're currently at $2,297, which is, I can tell you for certain, that is more than Ben ever expected to have in terms of support.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much. Thank you very much, because Ben Hovind is a nice person, and this is a nice thing to help out somebody who's doing nice things for other people. So thank you.
His head's gonna get so big.
No. He's a nice person. So
no,
I think he'll survive. So back. Let's go back to think about this. So let's say, for example, you earned at the end of the year $24,000, and they say, well, wait a minute, $24,000 divided by 2, that's $2,000 a month, which means, and let's say to get a government assistance, you had to have under 1,000. I'm just making up numbers. They say, therefore, all this government assistance you got for those 8 months of unemployment, you need to give back. So the old days, you say, who's got started? Well, labor started this notion of let's look at who's getting government assistance to make sure they qualify. And they had humans doing stuff where someone would come and look and say, "Oh, I see." When you say, "Did you really deserve this stuff?" and they come back and say, "Yes, I got a job the last three months." Okay, fine, right? But what the coalition, let's call it the Liberal Party, National Party scumbags did was to automate this set. They pushed on the social narrative saying, well, we're going after government system cheats and people is stealing from you. Those people who don't deserve it, right? And they pull that sort of thing. But what they're really doing was, again, over 470,000 people got these letters. They were not bills. But imagine the government tax office sending you a legitimate letter saying, hey,
I got a letter from IRD telling me I owed 47 cents to them, and I freaked out.
Yeah.
And then I read it properly, and they said, you don't owe any money, you don't have to pay anything. And I was just like, okay.
The typical letter someone would get was several $1,000s saying, and what worse is to do is they would say, you have to go and collect receipts and provide us with evidence or pay the money. And in many cases, the government tax office.
Did this happen during COVID?
Well, in fact, this started around. I mean, some of the worst stuff started around 2017. It gets worse. It gets worse. So accountants, as you said, were saying, "Hey, this is BS." And if someone pushed it, they'd have an arbitration panel that would just decide, "Okay, let's drop it." Right? They would try not to have the stuff go to trial because they didn't want. It wasn't until much later that someone sued and said, "Not only did I not owe you the money, but you have to give it back with interest," right? And that they had a suit on that, and a judge basically ripped them to shreds, saying this is not legal, not valid. And even then, the government kept going at this stuff, right? It kept going. So imagine you're sitting there trying to make ends meet, and you get this demand letter that claims 5 years ago, 7 years ago, you need to give all this government assistance back because they think you were earning too much money. Because they think the average you had over the year would disqualify you from stuff. And then they tell you have to go to employers that may not be in business to get proof, to prove to them you don't owe this money. And some people would just give up and pay it to get them off their back. Some people would decide. So this notion it went on, but it started off in there were people. It's true, the Labor government had early programs, but it became.
How many people did they put in debt? Holy
so since the 1970s, the Australian tax office has used data matching systems to do this. Where it became when it became robotic, and people went from auditing stuff that a human could do to thousands and thousands and thousands per week getting these notices. And when the Liberal National Government Coalition knew that judges were saying this is wrong, they had multiple Senate inquiries that would say, "Hey, you need to stop this stuff." They kept doing it. Why? Because they figured the people who were getting this money are not their mates. They're not people who are going to donate to their party, and so screw them. And this is a way of raising money. It is. So it finally came when the Labor Party came to power. They in August of last year started a Royal Commission. The Royal Commission has just handed down a report that really rips to shreds and shows just how many Australians had stuff. There was a
how many
lawsuit.
people did they push to debt towards debt, man? Seriously, like
over and again Australia's not a popular country, but they know at least 470,000 people that got notices that robotic stuff and were pushed into trying to solve this problem.
The thing that we're reading says that the government on Friday morning received an almost 1,000-page, 3-volume final report. That's how big the
So-
report was.
Mm-hmm.
So there were about
That's
300,000
Yeah.
of people disputing these things a year, but they had a tribunal, if they tried to appeal to people, that could only manage 20,000 of these cases a year. So they had this large backlog of stuff. They weren't even processing of stuff. So the Royal Commission basically said essentially that this was illegal, that the government knew it was illegal for years, but kept pushing it forward. And you have there is a piece of poo known as Scott Morrison, a person who tries to push himself as this holy Christian blah 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 person.
I want to beat his ass, seriously.
Who was
As a
the
friendly
minister
neighbor,
of,
I would like to contribute towards that. Thank you.
he was before he was prime minister. He was a minister of social services that was pushing this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Of course he
You know,
was.
they announced. So there has been a lawsuit. They've had about a $1.8 billion settlement so far, but this does not.
Billion.
Of stuff. And the Royal Commission came back with stuff saying $1.8 billion settlement, right? So far. And
So far.
and one of the things that also the Royal Commission did was to say essentially that government screwed up. The government knew they were screwing up. They knew it was for years screwing up, but they kept doing it anyway.
They should be jailed for this.
There is a sealed part. Here's the thing: there's a sealed part of this Royal Commission, which recommends potential criminal charges against some people who are to be named. Right now, if you look at who's squawking. If you look at and I would invite you, for example, go to Wikipedia and look up RoboDebt scheme.
This is Scott Morrison.
It'll give you a much more detailed thing. You'll see a cast of characters of stuff, but again, they had people saying, they'd say, well, hey, if you got advice that essentially said, hey, you should be doing this, what did you do? Well, we just ignored the advice because we wanted this instead, right? There's some stuff. You see people complaining about this scheme. They're these cult personality people who are worried that they might be named in the Royal Commission for possible.
Oh, fuck off! Who cares? Hey,
but again,
yeah, they should be worried because they seem to.
Yep.
And also, like, it's what I'm looking at here is the reason they gave that they kept doing it was because nobody told them that it was unlawful. Like, why the fuck are you in power?
And they know.
You cannot sit down and Why did you come up with
federal
Senate elections then?
Twice had
had
inquiries on this, and they said you should stop this, you should suspend this program until these are fixed, and they kept doing it. They had also arbitration appeals where the government would do at level 1 appeal, the matter is kept private. And if they couldn't get the stuff, they would just dump the thing and not let it go to the public little things. And even when they got in lawsuits, they would essentially settle and they would recalculate the person's debt and say, Your Honor, we calculated this person and we find they owe us nothing. So there's no case and get it dropped, right? Well, they kept doing the same. Now, Mr. Morrison, the piece of poo down under, issued a 1,200-word statement saying, I completely reject this. Right? And I'm just hoping that justice will, for those people that knew this was wrong. And understand, this is going after the most vulnerable people. Most vulnerable people. And there were people who were financially ruined trying to get this extra money. People who committed suicide. People would just get a letter from the tax office and just say, well, I better just pay it rather than try to fight it because I don't have the money to get a barrister trying to go into court. And then the government would when they tried, for example, to get government people to point at, let's say, a Senate inquiry. There are two federal Senate inquiries that said this is a bunch of BS, you should not do it. Imagine, so you've got enough money to fight this in court, and you want to go to court and say, hey, look at the Senate inquiry. Well, you know what the government would do? They would say parliamentary privilege. Okay? There's a law in Australia that says that members of parliament cannot be held legally liable for what they say while in parliament.
There's
really?
Apply that to say,
Why
and
are they in
therefore
parliament?
you
Okay.
cannot
I wanna
use the
point
Senate
out-
record.
This is actually a pretty common law in like a lot of countries that have a legislative body of elected officials. It's also there's a similar law in the United States that says that things that might otherwise be criminal that are said on the floor of like the House of Representatives or the Senate in the United States are also exempt from most various laws. There are exceptions. There are some laws that you can't violate that way, but you can violate most laws that way as long as it's part of the actual debate. So I don't want people to think that this is like a weird Australia.
But there's something very important, a very important distinction that Australia does.
Oh, yeah.
And there's this, right? If you have been wanting to go to court to sue the government over this money I didn't owe, give it back, and you use as evidence the public record of the Senate hearing, the government comes back and says, parliamentary privilege, you cannot use this information. You can't even use it in court. Right? It's not a matter of you don't sue the ministers who were involved in it. Is that you can't even use this data. I mean, Friendly Jordy's found out when he was having a lawsuit against the deputy premier of a state that he couldn't use as evidence the information that person actually did while in office, right? In Parliament. So Australia goes farther to say, hey, we'll decide when we want to have parliamentary privilege, and if it's not convenient for us, you can't even use the fact that there was the results of the inquiry. Right? The reason why you can do this now is the Royal Commission was handed to the Governor General, who published it in a 3-volume report. And so that you can do. But they'll still try to, if you go back to say, hey, Scott Morrison, they'll say, you can't even use this information. You can't even present this information in court.
The report also says that some of the people involved, particularly this Mr. Trudge person, knew that people were committing suicide over it.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, I want to answer a quick question from Savage. I pay every tax I owe Cobra, who asks, "Is revenge pornography covered by that?" Meaning the the legislative privilege in the United States. Actually, as it turns out, no, because that privilege actually only covers federal law and not district or state law. Which means that if you were say some kind of representative whose name was maybe like Mary Tyler Gore or something, or maybe had similar initials, and you posted
Marjorie Taylor Greene, yeah, man, go for it.
right, and you
Don't
and
wreck
say
the
you
fun,
held up
Maanyaa.
you held up big printouts of, say, the president's son engaged in sexual activity on the floor of the legislative body. You could in fact still be prosecuted under the laws of the District of Columbia. You could not be prosecuted under any federal statutes for that, but there are no federal statutes about revenge pornography. But there are revenge pornography statutes in the District of Columbia. So Marjorie Taylor Greene could be prosecuted for
I
revenge
think so.
pornography.
There is some complaint going on against her, isn't it? Somebody is trying to lodge a complaint against her for putting up those. But it was like that was around like exposing people in that inquiry to those pictures. I don't think so. It was about revenge pornography, if I'm not.
Well, so she also emailed that picture to her mailing list.
Okay.
Which, by the way, does not have an age verification. Which means if any
Alright,
people who got that email are minors, she could now be in trouble for showing that to minors.
We'll have to come back to Marjorie Taylor.
I'm trying to wrap this stuff up, right? Because it can go in there. Here's a summary. In fact, I put into Discord a chat. If Chesh, you can put on there, which is a link to the RoboDebt scheme Wikipedia page, which gives a fair history of this particular problem, right? But you'll see the National Liberal Coalition trying to say, well, this was a scheme originally invented by labor, so it's their fault, right? But they're the ones that automated it, knew it was wrong, had rulings against them, kept deciding and kept doing it anyway. So we will see what happens with a Royal Commission, which the Liberal Nationals would never have done. In fact, Scott Morrison continues to object to the whole thing in the first place because they know it was going for the most vulnerable that they don't give a damn about, right? It is repugnant, and it exposes a big problem in Australia, which is their libel laws tend to be there to protect the powerful against the people who don't have the money to afford a barrister and $500,000 to go into court. And their parliamentary privilege laws prevent people from using the public record of what Parliament did in trying to defend themselves against the government, right? It is my contention that of the first world countries on the planet, by far, Australia is the most corrupt. Not because there's out-and-out bribery, there is. It is because these types of things happen, and in some cases, it is by the government with full knowledge, full understanding of the stuff. So give a look at that sort of thing. It is an outrageous system, and I'm hoping that those people who perpetrated this really bad situation is or will be brought to justice. They deserve it, and kudos to the Labour government and the current Prime Minister for getting this Royal Commission going, not interfering, supplying Royal Commission with as much information as possible, and letting Royal Commission do its job. It's a disgusting travesty.
The fundraiser for Beethoven's replacement transmission is still going. We are currently past the halfway point as of this stream, right? Before the stream, we were not at the halfway point. We are now past it. Thank you very much. In case you were wondering, this is in fact, Beethoven is a disabled veteran who has been horribly abused by the Veterans Affairs Office to the point of having doctors simply throw away vital paperwork for him, resulting in him having his career ruined. He is currently trying to get back into that career, but having transportation to a new job is an important part of that. And this was an unexpected expense that is extremely, it's very significant. It's extremely significant expense, basically. It's over $4,200 US. It's a lot of money, especially for someone who is trying to get back on his feet and has been struggling just to get to break-even point after losing a career for several years now. Beethoven, in case you don't know, is a big part of not just my channel, but also Chesh's channel. He's done music for Chesh's channel. He's been a guest on Chesh's channel. He's a regular guest on my channel. He does a significant amount of the music that appears on my channel. And I think he's an important part of the community. He does a lot of work both behind the scenes and on camera for my channel and Chesh's channel. And so if you find yourself in a position where you are financially able to help out Bent without, significantly harming your own finances, please consider helping out. It's currently linked in the chat as the pinned chat, and I don't know if it's in the description yet, but it will be. So yeah, check out either of those. As far as I know, the fundraiser is likely to run for a bit more than a week or longer. I'm not sure. Bent hasn't decided how long. He has said though that if it does reach its goal, he will be shutting it down. He's not doing this for his own profit, right? He's not out here like, oh, give me $6 million. No, he just wants to cover this unexpected expense so that he can continue to try and get to this new job that he's working on, make money, get back into the black, save up some more, just try to get back on his feet, basically. So if you find yourself in a position where you can, please do consider giving any amount, $1, $2, whatever, it all adds up.